Every once in a while, I go into Facebook Live and I share a message with people concerning what is in my heart at that particular moment in time. And this time around, I took some liberty to record it, and so that I can be able to share it with you here on this podcast. So here it is. Enjoy.
Welcome to the Life Signatures podcast with Lawrence Namale. Lawrence is a life coach, author, and keynote speaker who loves to tackle different topics on purpose, productivity, and resilience. His mission in life is to awaken all your boundless possibilities available in you. Life Signatures podcast is dedicated to bring to reality every single person who knows that deep down in their gut, there's got to be more to life than this. And now, here is your host, Lawrence Namale.
It's been quite a while since we last spoke, and I know things have changed. Things are changing on a daily basis. Things are unpredictably changing, and so that calls to us to also change, and also in tow of the changes that are coming up, to behave the same way. We cannot continue being the same even as things are changing. Today in the podcast, I'm going to talk about content versus context. And this is just a carry on the several messages that I've been talking about on Facebook Live, even on this channel. I first started talking about the worst case scenario, considering that changes were coming, and we had thought that we were insulated from all these changes, and then they did come. And then I started talking about how we can become productive even when these changes are happening. And I was using the example of someone who is jobless to mirror the situation we found ourselves in, that we are now, quote unquote, working from the home. That what can we be able to do in order to leverage the context that has changed, so that we can continue becoming as productive as we would want to be, as we would like to be. And we've been saying that chances are that we could be sitting back waiting for things to change, and the thing is that these things might not necessarily change. In other words, that the time we're having at this moment can be treated as useless time, but it can also be treated as useful time. And I told you that the silver bullet for this to happen is simply one: that if you and I are not going to have an agenda for this season, if we're not going to have a weekly agenda, and if we're not going to be as intentional as possible during this season, chances are that you and I will not be productive. Chances are that as the days go by and as we wait, the other day we were waiting, and as many people as I was talking to before yesterday, they were hopefully considering going to work today, that is in Uganda, given that we were on a lockdown, on a 14-day lockdown. And very many people were thinking, even against the odds, that the cases in Uganda are not as many as in other countries. We've not had any death. In fact, we're having less cases being reported, and people are getting healed and so on. So chances are that we will go back to work. We were not considering the worst case scenario that I talked about when I started talking about all these things. And we were thinking we were going to go back to work, and we were waiting for that moment to come. Yesterday came and the president went on a 2-hour talk, and then he just dropped the hammer, and then he moved on as if nothing had happened. That we are extending this thing to 21 days. The question is, what do we do in the 21 days? And they might not be just the 21. You know that we've already done more than 14 days. We've done 15 days in a lockdown. Now we're being added 21 more days. So what can we do to leverage this moment and continue being productive? And I'm speaking to people who have been jobless before, as well as people who are becoming jobless even in the moment. My message today is simply this: there's got to be content at every one point in time. There's got to be content, and I'm putting content as a metaphor, but there's also going to be context. Someone told us that the only thing that never changes in life is change itself. The only constant thing in life is change. And now we have to look at the contexts that we are operating in, but make sure that our content stays firm and stays resolute. Our content is metaphorical to mean our productivity, to mean our purpose, to mean the things that will cause us as human beings to remain effective and productive with the life that God has given us. The context is always going to gravitate, it's always going to change. But that does not give us an excuse not to be productive, not to be effective, not to produce, not to create, not to impact, not to influence, not to contribute. We are always called to produce, to contribute, to be effective, to be the best versions of ourselves, even when the context is changing daily. And so I say that if this context of ours has changed, for the most cases we are working quote unquote from home, and there are other people who are not working at all because they do not have jobs. The context has changed. So what do you do when the context has changed? I say that the silver bullet is simply this: you and I have got to have an agenda. We must have a weekly agenda that dictates our productivity and dictates our sharpening of the saw. And how is this going to be done? This is going to be done when we understand at the back of our minds that probably the productivity Lawrence is talking about today is not necessarily going to give me money at the end of the week. This productivity Lawrence is talking about is not going to give me money at the end of the month, or maybe even at the end of the day. The problem with us is that we don't have agendas because the agenda we want to have must be necessarily linked to a benefit that comes tangibly and visibly and predictably at the end of a period of time or at the end of doing something. That's why we choose to have an agenda when we have a job. We choose to have an agenda when we have courseworks. We choose to have an agenda when we have a project. But when all these things are being taken away, schools are being sent home. Schools are closed. People are being sent home from places of work. Some are being rendered jobless. Now look at your agenda. Look at your calendar. It's as empty as a desert. That is not the way it's supposed to be. And we say that if you're going to have an agenda, the weekly agenda, we must know at the back of your mind that it is not necessarily going to pay you at the end of the month. But what you're doing is that you're sharpening yourself. Your content is being sharpened so that when you emerge out of the whatever context that has changed, you are sharper. You are still there. Look at the footballers. You guys, you know that the Premier Leagues have been suspended and all those things. Footballers are not necessarily working, so to speak. They work during weekends and when they play and so on. But question is, what are they doing in this moment that the context has changed? Their content is supposed to continue. When the leagues are opened and all those things, they are supposed to be sharp. They're supposed to be on point. They're supposed to be delivering. In fact, most of you are going to expect your footballers to deliver the same way that they were delivering before the lockdowns came. Why will they be doing that? It's because they have an agenda that has never changed. The context in their lives has never changed. The same applies to you and I. And we say that there are 8 areas in your life that you need to have an agenda around. Your health, that is the physical, your mind, the mental, your spirit, the spiritual, your family, your relationships, your finances, your business, and your lifestyle. You need to organize all those areas around the whole week so that you have a weekly agenda. But then we say that there are some pillars that are upholding these things together. And today I want to discuss one more pillar. And this is the pillar of content. The context is always changing. But what are you about? In other words, when I am sitting down to craft my agenda for the week, what are some of the things that I'm going to put there? The things that I normally call the non-negotiables. Come to think about it. See, when this coronavirus thing has come, do you know one of the things that it has made us to understand? It has made us to understand what matters the most, or what is the most important thing. Did you know I have realized that the most important thing for me is not necessarily to drive out of home and go out there to work. It is not necessarily the most important thing. There are some non-negotiables that I must do, whether I am going out there to work or I am in here in the house for X number of days. Those are the non-negotiables that you and I need to consider. Someone said that in matters of fashion, swim with the currents. But in matters of principle, stand like a rock. Now, when you're standing like a rock in order to create your agenda for the week, the question I'm going to ask you today is this: what is it that you're going to consider? What are you going to put in there in the agenda? It has to be something that contributes to your content. It has to be something that contributes to your productivity, to your purpose at the end of the day, to your destiny at the end of the day. So when you wake up, for example, I don't know who you are and I don't know what your calling is, I don't know what your title is, but I'm going to use the example of a public speaker. This is someone who is paid for speaking, inspiring people, and that is a very highly paying field, by the way. Some people are normally paid $20,000 to deliver a single speech in less than an hour. Some people are paid $5,000 and so on and so forth. Now that is his calling, probably that is his purpose in life, to speak a word in season to people who are weary. The weekly agenda must of necessity consider that aspect of his life. How is it going to be catered for? That is his big non-negotiable. On a daily basis, what does a public speaker do? And so you need to look at it from the context of who your calling is, what your calling is, who you are in life. On a daily basis, there's got to be a way we find something to do that contributes towards building the pillar of our calling, building the pillar of our purpose, because we are all called. The worst we can do is to sit home waiting for the situation to come back to normal. It might not come, and even if it does come back to normal, think of the time that we are losing. Think of the seasons that we are missing. Think of the bluntness that is coming into our lives if we're not continuing to sharpening the soul by doing the non-negotiables. Things that relate to your calling, things that relate to your purpose, things that relate to your destiny. Those are things that we need to sharpen on a daily basis, even as we are waking up. These are what Steve R. Covey called the big rocks. He said that when you're doing your plans and you take the analogy of putting some rocks into a bottle, if you start putting the small rocks into a bottle, at the end of the day, into a jar, at the end of the day, you will not have room for the big rocks. The big rocks are the things that matter the most. The other day, 2 days ago, I went on to Facebook and I asked a question, an open-ended question. I asked, what matters to you the most? There must be an answer to that. And the goodness is that what matters to me is not necessarily what matters to you, and doesn't mean that it is wrong now that it doesn't matter to you. It just matters to me because of my context. What is important is your content. My context is totally different from your context, but content must always, at all the time, be catered for. And that is what we're going to put in our weekly agenda. So the question is this: what is your content? What is the most important thing to you? Who are you? What is your calling? And in the view of the context that has changed, what is it that you're going to put in your weekly agenda to cater for this content? Because the world still expects of you and me to deliver at the end of the day. At the end of the day, all of us are being faced with this thing. When this thing comes and it goes, we're not going to give excuses, the coronavirus. And by the way, those excuses have already started. Most of the people who owe people money, they're already talking about the coronavirus, corona. You see, but at the end of the day, one of the things that we need to learn is this: that life will need to keep moving on. We cannot be excused out of life because of corona. No, we can never even call for an excuse of corona so that we are let off the hook in terms of our productivity, in terms of our calling, in terms of our presence, our content in life. We still are supposed to deliver. We still are supposed to be productive. We still are supposed to appear in life sharper than ever before. There cannot be any excuses. So this time of lockdown, these 21 days, by the way, I heard that, is it Botswana? They are on a 60 days lockout. Is it 6 months? 6 month lockdown for those guys in Namibia, in Botswana. Probably this should go to them. What do you do when you're on a 60 day lockdown? 6 months, 60, whatever it is. But it's long. It's very extremely long. You make sure that your big rocks are catered for fully, totally, and you make sure that you're sharpening the saw. So the public speaker I was talking about, what could he do? On a daily basis, he could stand before the mirror and he could speak. He could recite some things. He could cram some stories. He could act on his intonation. He could work on his speech, on his levels, and so on and so forth. If you're a software developer, you've got no excuse whatsoever. If you are a leader in whatever context, the big rock for you is to lead yourself and create this agenda, weekly agenda that I am talking about. So in a nutshell, even as I come to a close, the context has changed, and the context will always change. The worst we can do as human beings is to always expect the same thing over and over again. Contexts will always change, but that is not an excuse whatsoever for us to slow down on our content. Our content needs to continue being delivered, and this content, I've used this as a metaphor to mean your agenda in life, what matters to you the most in life, your purpose and your calling in life. It needs to continue being catered for, even when no one is going to pay you at the end of the month, or at the end of the week, or at the end of the day. You must still consider making sure that the saw is sharpened and you are sharp for the day every single working day. So consider this as I come to a close. What do you have in your weekly agenda? Do you have the weekly agenda to begin with? And then secondly, what is the most important, what matters to you in terms of productivity in this life? Not in your job, but in this life. And the question is, what are you doing on a daily basis, or even on a weekly basis if you can do daily, that is contributing to sharpening you so that your content is still top notch, regardless of the changes in the context. I hope this makes sense to you. You are a business enterprise, in case you did not know, and therefore you need that weekly agenda and you need that weekly tracker. Well, until next time, I hope this makes sense to you. Stay home, stay safe, stay productive, mind about your content, even when the context has changed. In matters of fashion, swim with the current. But in matters of purpose, in matters of principle, stand like a rock. Adios. Bye-bye. A special shout out to my mentor Jeffrey Howard of Visionary Business University, found at mastermindmentor.com, who has graciously provided me with the soundtrack and the introductory track to this podcast. Thank you, Jeff.
Thank you for listening to Life Signatures Radio. If you enjoyed today's show, subscribe to Life Signatures Radio on iTunes, Stitcher, or visit our website at lifesignatures.libsyn.com. Life Signatures Radio, fresh, clean, and inspiring.